Sometimes the longest journey a soul takes is the one from fear to love. Welcome to Vale Marks, where every story holds a quiet truth waiting to be discovered. Today's story is not just about a dog. It's about second chances, about healing, and about the invisible scars that only time and love can soothe. This isn't just another rescue story. It's a lesson wrapped in fur and silence, in the quiet footsteps of a pitbull named Ruby, who had been returned not once, not twice, but 7 times. Stay with us till the end. The journey may surprise you. The ending may stay with you. They called her Little Miss Sunshine. At Forest Haven Shelter, a small animal rescue center tucked between rustling pine trees in northern Texas, the staff had seen their fair share of dogs come and go. But none like Ruby. She wasn't just a pit bull with a sleek slate-gray coat and those soft, intelligent eyes. She was a mystery wrapped in a wagging tail. Ruby had something that made people stop and smile. Maybe it was the way she tilted her head when someone spoke to her, as if she were listening with more than just ears. Maybe it was the way her entire backside wiggled with excitement whenever she saw a familiar face. She wasn't just affectionate, she was sunshine in motion. Even the grumpiest volunteers had a hard time staying cold around her. But behind that joyful demeanor, there was something else, something none of them could quite name. You see, Ruby had been returned. Not once, not twice, but 7 times. 7 different homes, 7 hopeful adoptions, 7 heartbreaking returns, and every time it was the same pattern. A family would meet her, fall in love with her sweet energy, her cuddly charm. The paperwork would be signed, photos taken, smiles all around. But within 3 weeks, sometimes even less, they would bring her back. No major complaints, just vague, sometimes conflicting explanations. "She's too hyper," one said. "She's not affectionate enough," said another. "She doesn't want to go on walks," one insisted. "She needs too much attention," another family claimed. "She stares at the baby monitor at night. It's unsettling." One woman returned her after discovering Ruby had chewed up her $300 designer sandals. "It's not about the shoes," she insisted. "It's just she doesn't fit in." But the shelter staff began to notice something even stranger. No 2 families gave the same reason. One called her clingy, another said she was aloof. Some said she barked too much. Others said she was eerily quiet. It was as if Ruby became a different dog with each household. And yet, at the shelter, she was consistently warm, eager, and loving. There were whispers among the staff, half-jokes made in passing. Maybe she's cursed. Maybe she's just too smart. Maybe she only wants to live here. But beneath the surface, concern began to grow, quietly, unspoken, but felt. What if something was wrong with Ruby? What if she was one of those dogs, sweet in public, unpredictable at home, a ticking clock in a collar? No one wanted to say it out loud. No one wanted to believe that about her. After all, Ruby was the dog that calmed crying toddlers in the shelter's meet-and-greet room, the one that instinctively leaned into the side of a trembling first-time volunteer, the one that waited patiently by the fence whenever the mailman came by, just to give him a chance to pet her. But still, 7 times? 7. It was hard to ignore. On the day she returned for the 7th time, it was raining. Not a thunderstorm, just a gray, soaking kind of rain that made the whole shelter smell like wet fur and pine needles. Ruby arrived in the back seat of a Subaru, her head resting on the window. The young couple who returned her looked more embarrassed than angry. "She's sweet," they said, "but it's just not the right fit." They didn't look her in the eyes as they handed over the leash. Ruby didn't resist. She stepped back inside like she already knew the routine, like she'd given up asking why. One of the staff members, a gentle older man named Craig, crouched down as Ruby padded in. She licked his hand, wagged her tail, and sat by his knee like nothing had happened. Craig ran a hand down her back and whispered, "You're back again, huh, Sunshine?" She leaned into him, calm, trusting, no fear, no confusion, as if she had never left. And that was the part that shook them the most. Not the fact that she kept coming back, but that she never seemed angry about it, never bitter. She greeted everyone like long-lost friends, curled up in her usual corner, and went about her day like nothing had changed. But when no one was watching, when the shelter grew quiet and the lights dimmed, some of them noticed it. The way Ruby stared at the door, the way she tilted her head toward every pair of footsteps, the way she sometimes let out a single low whimper in her sleep, as if dreaming of something she couldn't reach. There was a look she gave, fleeting, fragile but unforgettable. It wasn't fear, it was hope, desperate, flickering hope, as if she were silently pleading with the universe, "Please, not again, please let me stay this time." And in that moment, even the most experienced of shelter workers had to turn away. Because deep down, they weren't just worried about Ruby being too much dog for the world. They were terrified that maybe, just maybe, the world had never been enough for Ruby, and nobody knew what to do about it. Not yet. Quinn had seen a lot of dogs during her time volunteering at Forest Haven Shelter. She was a final-year student majoring in animal behavioral psychology, a field that taught her how to study the mind behind the bark, to read patterns others might miss, to look deeper than wagging tails and puppy dog eyes. But no textbook had ever prepared her for Ruby. There was something about the pitbull's eyes, not the way they sparkled when someone reached for her leash, or how they softened when she curled up beside a volunteer, but the moments in between, the still moments, when Ruby thought no one was looking. That was when her gaze shifted, quiet, searching, almost fractured, like she was still trying to piece together who she was supposed to be. Most people saw a sweet, playful dog with a loving nature, and she was all that. But Quinn saw something else. She saw someone trying hard, too hard, to be the version of herself that people would want. A dog that had learned how to smile even when she was breaking inside. It haunted her. Ruby had become a case study, not on paper, but in Quinn's heart. A living, breathing contradiction. How could a dog so kind, so eager to please, keep getting returned like an unwanted package? It didn't make sense, unless you stopped viewing her as just a dog. To Quinn, Ruby looked more like a child who had been passed from one foster home to another. A child who had learned to read the room faster than most adults, who masked her fear with charm, who was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting to be told, once again, that she just didn't belong. No one had said it out loud, but Quinn had heard the murmurs. "She's a nice dog, but maybe she's just not adoptable." The words cut deep. They reminded Quinn of stories she'd read in class about behavioral red flags and incompatibility syndromes. Labels. Labels that made it easier to move on, easier to give up, but something inside her wouldn't let go. It was raining again the day Ruby returned for the 7th time. Quinn had stayed late to help clean the kennels. As she was walking past the intake room, she saw Ruby being led back in by a staff member. Her leash hung loose. Her tail gave a few half-hearted wags. She looked tired, not in her body, but in her spirit. Their eyes met, just for a second. And in that second, Quinn felt a jolt in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't pity. It was connection, recognition. Like Ruby was asking her something without words. "Will you give me a chance, even if no one else will?" Later that night, Quinn sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at nothing. Her textbooks were open, but her mind was elsewhere. Ruby's eyes wouldn't leave her. That single look had imprinted itself onto her thoughts. It wasn't logic that made Quinn stand up and grab her phone. It wasn't data or research or behavioral theory. It was something deeper. The next morning, She walked into the shelter before her shift started, still damp from the early mist, and headed straight for the director's office. "I want to take Ruby home," she said. The room went quiet. Her supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Carla, who had worked in rescue for over 20 years, gave her a long look. "You know the risks," Carla said gently. "We don't know the full picture yet. She's been through a lot." Quinn nodded. "Exactly. And I think that's the problem. Everyone's been guessing. I want to know. Let me observe her in a real environment. For a week. Just 7 days. No pressure. If it doesn't work, she comes back." Carla sighed. "Are you sure this is for study or for something else?" Quinn paused. "It started as study," she said. "But now, I think it's something I need to do. Not as a student, as a person." There was a beat of silence. Then Carla reached into a drawer, pulled out a clipboard, and handed it over. "Sign here. And make sure you lock up your shoes." Quinn laughed softly, more out of nerves than amusement. By that evening, she was back at the shelter, crouched by Ruby's kennel. The dog looked up at her, ears twitching, tail lifting uncertainly. "Hey, sunshine," Quinn whispered. "You ready for a little adventure?" Ruby tilted her head, then stepped forward and gently pressed her forehead against Quinn's shoulder. It wasn't a jump or a bark or a wag. It was quieter than that. It was trust. Quiet and hesitant, but real. As Quinn buckled Ruby into the back seat of her car, she whispered, half to herself, half to the dog, "If no one else is going to figure you out, then I will. I may not know exactly what's wrong, but I know this. You don't deserve to keep being returned like a broken thing. You deserve someone who won't give up on you." The drive home was quiet at first. Then, Ruby pawed at the passenger seat window. When Quinn rolled it down, Ruby leaned her head out, tongue flapping in the wind, ears flying back like soft gray wings. She looked back at Quinn and gave a soft little sneeze, almost like a giggle. Quinn smiled. It wasn't science. It wasn't part of a thesis. It was a choice, a leap of faith. Not made by someone who had all the answers, but by someone who was finally willing to sit with the questions and love anyway. The first night in a new home is supposed to be special. For most adopted dogs, it's a celebration. New toys, fresh bowls, maybe a cozy bed by the fireplace. But for Ruby, it felt like a dream she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. Quinn had prepared everything in advance. The corner of the living room was transformed into a little sanctuary. Soft blanket, water bowl, a few chew toys, and a plush giraffe that looked far too innocent for its own good. There was even a nightlight, just in case darkness still reminded Ruby of places she didn't want to remember. As they entered the apartment, Ruby hesitated at the threshold. She didn't bolt forward like Quinn expected. Instead, she stood still, head low, tail down, paws frozen, as if trying to decode what this place wanted from her. Quinn knelt beside her. "It's okay," she whispered. "Take your time." Ruby slowly padded forward, her nails clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She sniffed the air, turning her head this way and that, ears flicking with each new sound. A refrigerator humming, a floorboard creaking. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's television echoed faintly through the wall. It was a quiet kind of chaos. Strange, but safe. By the time they reached her corner, Ruby had relaxed a little. She circled twice, then sank down onto the blanket like someone who wasn't sure whether they were allowed to rest. Quinn watched from the couch, heart tight in her chest. She remembered what one of the shelter workers had told her offhandedly. She always sleeps with one eye open, like she's waiting for something bad to happen. It turned out that was true. Even in this quiet apartment, Ruby didn't let herself fully unwind. Her ears twitched every few seconds. Her breathing was shallow, but still, she was there. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't tried to escape. For now, That was enough. The next morning began with cautious optimism. Quinn woke early, tiptoeing around the kitchen to make coffee. She glanced into the living room and found Ruby still curled on her blanket, eyes blinking slowly in the soft morning light. There was something heartbreakingly beautiful in that moment. A dog who had been passed between homes like a misunderstood burden, simply lying still, in peace, if only for a moment. Quinn sat beside her on the floor, gently petting the curve of her back. "Welcome home, Ruby," she said softly. Ruby looked up, leaned into the touch, and for the first time licked Quinn's hand. Progress. But peace, it turned out, was fleeting. Later that afternoon, Quinn opened the hallway door, allowing Otis, her senior Labrador, to wander in for a brief greeting. He was calm, slow-moving, and endlessly gentle. Behind him, Milo, her long-haired tabby cat, followed at a curious distance, tail flicking. The moment Ruby saw them, everything changed. Her entire body stiffened. Her lips curled back. A low, guttural growl rose from her throat like a warning torn from memory. Before Quinn could intervene, Ruby lunged, fast and sudden, not out of hate, but out of something deeper. Something wired into her bones. Otis barely dodged the charge, backing up with a confused bark. Milo leapt onto the bookshelf in a single bound, knocking down a framed photo in the process. It hit the ground with a sharp crack, but Quinn barely heard it. All she could see was Ruby, shoulders hunched, eyes wild, teeth bared. Not a threat, but a soul in defense mode, like a soldier flinching at a sudden sound. Like a child who's been taught that danger hides behind every door. Quinn's heart broke, not because Ruby had reacted aggressively, but because the reaction made sense. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't dominance. This was survival. She stepped forward carefully, speaking low and calm. "Hey, Ruby, it's okay. They're not here to hurt you. I promise." Ruby stood frozen, chest heaving. Her gaze darted between Otis and the now silent Milo. Quinn knelt down slowly, arms out, and moved behind her. Then she did something most trainers would probably frown upon. She wrapped her arms around Ruby's body and pulled her close, gently, firmly, like a weighted blanket placed over a shaking child. "No one's going to hurt you here," she whispered. "You don't have to fight anymore." Ruby didn't move, didn't growl. Slowly, her breathing began to slow. Her tail lowered, no longer stiff. Her ears relaxed by a fraction. She didn't understand everything Quinn was saying, but she understood the tone, the warmth, the message. Quinn didn't let go, not for a long time. Later that evening, after Otis and Milo had been given their own safe spaces and everything was calm again, Quinn sat in the kitchen journaling the day's events. It had only been 24 hours, and already the emotional weight was more than she'd anticipated. She scribbled down one sentence and circled it 3 times. "She isn't dangerous. She's just been taught to expect the worst." Ruby lay nearby, chin on paws, watching her. Not fearful now, just tired, wary, but present. There was no denying the work ahead would be hard. But somewhere deep inside Quinn's gut, a certainty had formed. Ruby wasn't broken, she was wounded. And wounds, if given time, space, and love, could heal. The question was never whether Ruby deserved a home. The real question was, would someone love her enough to stay long enough to watch her bloom? That night, as Quinn turned off the lights and settled into bed, she heard a soft sound. Turning her head, she saw Ruby curled up at the foot of the bed, closer than she had been before. Not touching, but closer. And that was something. A bridge between fear and trust. A first step from the past, toward something new. Quinn had always believed that behavior was a language, one that could be learned, translated, and understood if you just listened closely enough. But Ruby's language? It was fractured. A mix of loving gestures and survival instincts, of trust offered in pieces and fear simmering just beneath the surface. She was a puzzle, scattered across 7 homes, with no one staying long enough to piece her together. That had to change. After the first few tense days at home, after Ruby had lunged at Otis and spooked poor Milo into permanent bookshelf residency, Quinn knew it wasn't just about rehabilitation anymore. It was about understanding, true understanding. If Ruby was ever going to have a real chance, Quinn had to know where she came from, what she had lived through, and why her instincts screamed danger even when she was safe. So, one quiet afternoon, Quinn sat at her kitchen table, Ruby asleep at her feet, and opened the old manila folder marked Ruby, File a 23. The pages inside were thin, worn, and incomplete, notes scrawled by shelter staff, brief reports from previous families, vet records, and a few phone numbers taped to a post-it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She took a deep breath and dialed the first number. A middle-aged woman named Trina answered. Her voice was gentle but hesitant, like someone unsure whether they wanted to remember. "I do remember Ruby," Trina said. "She was sweet, mostly, but we had a cat. And there was this one night—" Quinn didn't interrupt. She let Trina talk. "She went after him, not just barking. It was full on, like something switched in her, no warning. We separated them fast, but it shook us up pretty bad." Quinn asked if Trina had reported it. There was a pause. "No," Trina said finally. "I was afraid. I didn't want her labeled as aggressive. I knew what that could mean for a pit bull, so we just said it didn't work out. I thought maybe someone without pets would give her a better chance." That same sentence, or some version of it, echoed across several other calls Quinn made that week. A young couple admitted they loved Ruby, but couldn't handle how she barked non-stop at the neighbor's dog, even through a glass door. An older man chuckled softly as he told her, "That girl's got smarts, I'll give her that. Figured out how to open my fridge within a week. But the funny thing? She only ever took the hot dogs, never touched anything else. And if I caught her in the act, she'd look at me and do this big, exaggerated yawn like, 'Oh, was I not supposed to be here?'" Despite the laughter, there was a common thread woven through every story. People hadn't returned Ruby because they didn't like her. Most of them had adored her. But something always happened. An incident, a flash of aggression, a moment of unpredictability that made them afraid to keep her. None of them wanted to see her suffer, so they kept the real stories quiet, for Ruby's sake. Quinn closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. These weren't bad people. They had tried, but love, it seemed, hadn't been enough. Not without understanding. She needed more. So she dug deeper. Through an old database shared by regional shelters, she traced Ruby's earliest intake form, long before Forest Haven. The record came from a seizure case in a rural county, tied to a now-defunct operation that had once made headlines for illegal dogfighting. The moment Quinn read the words, her stomach dropped. The form listed over 20 dogs seized from a dilapidated property in the woods. Several had injuries. Many had clear signs of trauma. Ruby, only about a year old at the time, had been found chained to a steel barrel, underweight but unscarred. No fight history, but raised in the environment nonetheless. That explained everything. Ruby hadn't been taught to play. She had been taught to survive, to growl first and ask questions later, to trust no one but herself. The world she came from had no room for cuddles or chew toys or feline housemates. It was teeth and noise and fear. And now, years later, those lessons still echoed inside her. Quinn closed her laptop and looked down at Ruby, still napping by her chair, twitching slightly in her sleep. "Poor girl," she whispered. "You were never bad. You were just born in a place that didn't know how to be kind." Her eyes burned as she whispered again, this time more to herself than anyone else. "She's not dangerous. She's just never been taught how to live without fear." The next day, Quinn added something new to Ruby's corner in the living room. A framed note, written in soft cursive, pinned above her blanket. It read, "You are safe here. You don't have to fight anymore." And for the first time, Ruby didn't just lay down on her blanket. She rolled over, exposed belly, soft breath, eyes closed. The first true sleep of someone who was finally beginning to believe she belonged. Trust isn't something you can demand. It's not something you earn with treats or toys or even kindness alone. For some, especially those who've lived with fear as a roommate, trust comes in fragments. Slow, delicate, often silent. And for Ruby, it came like rainfall on dry soil, sparse, then steady, then finally, something that might grow. Quinn knew that healing Ruby would require more than a quiet home and a soft blanket. It would take work, deliberate, structured, patient work. And it wouldn't be about obedience. It would be about rewiring the world as Ruby had known it, helping her unlearn what had once kept her alive, but was now holding her back from truly living. So the first step? A baby gate. She set it up in the hallway between the living room and kitchen, creating a safe barrier where Ruby and Otis, the gentle old Labrador, could see each other, but not touch. It was a line of safety, one Ruby needed, one Quinn hoped they could someday remove. The first few sessions were tense. Ruby's body stiffened the moment she saw Otis approach. Her growl was low, deep, a vibration from the chest. Not aggressive, but defensive. A clear warning. Otis, bless him, would pause, wag his tail once, and lie down a few feet from the gate, panting lightly as if to say, "No rush, kid. I'm not going anywhere." Quinn sat beside Ruby during those moments. Not to correct, not to discipline, just to be there. Calm. Unafraid. "It's okay," she whispered each time. "You're safe. He's not here to hurt you." And every day the growl came a little later, a little softer. Some days it didn't come at all. By day 10, something extraordinary happened. Quinn placed Ruby by the gate as usual. Otis strolled in with his usual easy rhythm and laid down just a few feet away. Ruby stood for a moment, alert, tense. Then she sat. Ears slightly perked, but her jaw relaxed. No bark, no growl, just stillness. 5 full minutes passed. Quinn didn't dare move. Her heart thudded in her chest, tears already threatening. When the moment ended, Ruby turned and walked calmly to her blanket, as if to say, "I'm done now." That night, Quinn opened her journal and wrote, "Today, Ruby didn't growl. For the first time, she chose peace instead of fear. I didn't teach her that. She chose it. All on her own." And then she cried. Not because the training had worked, but because Ruby had finally felt safe enough to let go, even if just for a moment. The days that followed weren't perfect. Some were quiet and full of progress. Others took a step back, growls returning, a bark too sharp, a glance too long. But slowly, Ruby began to realize the world around her was not something she needed to brace against. Milo, the aloof long-haired tabby, had been keeping his distance, watching everything with feline skepticism. But on day 13, he boldly strutted past Ruby's corner on his way to the windowsill. Ruby didn't flinch, didn't bark, didn't chase. She blinked, flicked her ear once, then rested her head back on her paws. Milo paused, turned slightly as if to say, "Impressive," and continued on his way. The next day, Ruby let Milo walk past again, this time only a foot away. Still no reaction. Quinn sat nearby, stunned. "That's progress," she whispered. That night, while cleaning under the couch, she found something unexpected tucked gently beneath Ruby's favorite blanket, a rubber toy shaped like a yellow Labrador, part of a forgotten old chew set. It wasn't torn apart. Not shredded, not buried. It had been carried and placed there, almost reverently. Quinn smiled. She placed it back where Ruby had hidden it. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it sneaks in, quiet and awkward, like Ruby carrying a rubber Otis under the couch and deciding, for reasons she couldn't explain, to keep it close. One evening, Quinn caught Ruby gently nudging the toy with her nose. Not chewing, just holding it, like a memory, like something she wasn't ready to let go of, but wasn't quite afraid of anymore. Quinn wrote again that night. She keeps Otis's toy under her blanket. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means everything. But today, she looked at him through the gate and her tail wagged once. That has to count for something. In time, Quinn started giving Ruby and Otis brief moments together with the gate open. Just a few minutes, fully supervised. At first, Ruby would hover cautiously, watching Otis's every move. But eventually, she sat beside him. Close, but not touching. Like a child learning what closeness feels like without danger. Every breakthrough came slowly, but Quinn didn't rush it, because trust that comes too quickly often breaks too easily, and Ruby deserved something real, something built from patience, not pressure. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance and the sky turned gray, Quinn found herself curled up on the couch reading. She looked up to find Ruby asleep beside Otis, both curled into matching C-shapes like parentheses wrapped around a quiet story. Quinn didn't reach for her phone, didn't move. She just sat there watching. Because sometimes the most powerful moments are the quiet ones, the ones where no one says anything, but everything is understood. Ruby was learning, not commands, not tricks, but how to breathe around love, how to stay when it was easier to run. And slowly, piece by piece, the shattered glass of her past was becoming something softer, something brighter, something that looked a lot like healing. Some moments don't arrive with trumpets. They come quietly, soft as breath, steady as sunrise. And when they do, you realize this is the turning point. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The clouds outside were soft and slow-moving, drifting like forgotten thoughts across a pale sky. Inside Quinn's apartment, something else was moving just as gently. Ruby. No more gates, no more barriers. Just an open living room and a dog who had finally earned the freedom to roam. She walked past Otis without flinching. Her tail wagged lightly, rhythmically, not out of fear or alertness, but ease. Milo, ever the feline monarch, stretched across the windowsill, unfazed by her presence. Ruby passed him with barely a glance, then circled her blanket twice and curled up beside the couch, her unofficial throne. Quinn sat nearby, pretending to read, though her eyes hadn't moved down the page in 20 minutes. She was watching Ruby, or maybe witnessing her, the way a gardener watches a flower that nearly didn't bloom. For weeks, she had waited for signs like this, signs that Ruby was no longer surviving, but living. And here it was, a dog lying belly up, half snoring, in the middle of a room she used to guard like a fortress. She had come so far, so why did Quinn feel so unsettled? That night, she lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slower. There was one final step left in Ruby's journey, going back to the shelter. Not as a return, but as a reintroduction. Now that Ruby was showing consistent signs of stability, the plan was for her to be listed again for adoption. A new family, a fresh start. That had always been the goal, right? Quinn sat up, pulled the folder from her nightstand, and opened it. Inside was the official re-entry form, basic questions about behavior, routines, improvements. She had filled most of it out already. All that was left was to sign at the bottom. Her hand hovered over the line. Ruby lay on the floor nearby, sound asleep, one paw tucked under her chin. Quinn stared at her, at the rise and fall of her chest, the tiny twitch of her ear, the half-smile dogs get when they're dreaming of something warm. A lump rose in her throat. Quinn had always known she was temporary, a stop on the road, a chapter in Ruby's story. But somewhere between the first night on the blanket and the first game of tug-of-war with Otis, that idea had started to unravel. It wasn't just that Ruby had changed. Quinn had, too. She hadn't meant to fall in love. She just did. And now, faced with the reality of letting Ruby go, she realized something she'd been afraid to say out loud. She didn't want this chapter to end. The next morning, Quinn brewed coffee but didn't drink it. She sat at the table with the folder open in front of her, form unsigned. Her pen tapped lightly on the wood. Ruby watched her from the rug, head tilted, sensing the weight in the room. Then, in one small but unforgettable gesture, Ruby stood, trotted over, and, without hesitation, placed her front paw gently on the edge of the paper. Quinn blinked. Ruby's paw stayed there like a signature, a quiet request, a claim. "I see," Quinn whispered. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" Ruby didn't move, just stood there gazing up at her, still and certain. The same dog who once couldn't bear the presence of another animal now played tug with Otis and let Milo sleep beside her on cold nights. The same dog who had once growled at every footstep now greeted the mailman with a soft tail wag and hopeful eyes. This wasn't the Ruby from the shelter. This was Ruby now, present, open, brave, not perfect, but transformed. She didn't need a new home. She already had one. Quinn stared at the form for another long moment, then picked it up, slowly, carefully, and tore it clean in half, then again into quarters. She dropped the pieces into the recycling bin, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. Otis perked his head up from his dog bed, sensing the shift in energy. Milo lifted his chin from the windowsill, blinked, and went back to sleep. And Ruby? Ruby lay down beside Quinn's feet, sighed, and rested her head on her paws like someone who finally knew where she belonged. Quinn leaned down, ran her hand gently over Ruby's back, and said softly, "From today on, this is your house too. No more waiting. No more wondering. You're home." She looked over at Otis and Milo, who now sat on either side of Ruby like quiet witnesses to a sacred decision. She chuckled. "Well," she said with a smirk, "looks like the living room's not mine anymore. Guess I'll just pay rent." Ruby gave a soft grunt, somewhere between a sigh and a smile, and closed her eyes. Later that afternoon, Quinn sent an email to the shelter. It was simple, just one sentence. "I've decided to adopt Ruby permanently. She's not going back. She's already home." They responded with a line of heart emojis and a note. "We knew it all along." But Quinn hadn't known, not really, until Ruby told her. Not with words, but with presence, with quiet persistence, with a paw on a form, with a heart that had once known only fear, finally brave enough to stay. That night, as the sky darkened and the hum of city traffic faded, the apartment filled with a peaceful kind of stillness. Ruby curled up beside Otis. Milo stretched across the armrest. Quinn sat on the floor, her back against the couch, surrounded by fur and warmth and breath. She didn't feel like a hero, just someone lucky enough to be chosen. And in the hush of that moment, she whispered the words she had longed to say since the day they met. "You don't have to go anywhere ever again. You're mine. We're yours. And this is forever." And for the first time in her life, Ruby believed it. Ruby didn't just live in the house now. She belonged in it. There was no more testing, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. The girl who once paced corners and slept with her ears up now snored softly on the bed beside Quinn each night, curled into a half-moon of fur and warmth, sometimes with her paw resting lightly against Quinn's leg like a silent confirmation. "I'm still here. I'm safe. I'm home." Mornings had their own rhythm now. The day began not with alarm clocks, but with the gentle sound of Milo, the ever-serious long-haired tabby licking Ruby's ears as if setting a standard of feline hygiene. Ruby would groan in response, stretch dramatically, back legs straight out behind her, and roll over onto her side, tail thumping against the hardwood. Otis, old and slow but still full of heart, would wander in next, wagging his tail in slow, deliberate circles like a metronome of contentment. There was no tension anymore, no gates, no supervision, only peace. They were a family now. Quinn watched it all unfold with a quiet kind of awe. She often found herself standing in the doorway with her coffee cup, just watching, as if by seeing it, she could somehow absorb more of it. Because what they had wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of joy that settled in your chest and made you breathe deeper. And Ruby glowed in it. Her coat looked shinier now, her steps lighter. She had a favorite spot by the window where she'd sit and watch the squirrels, occasionally giving a half-hearted bark, more for conversation than warning. Her old instincts had softened, replaced by something tender, something trusting. One afternoon, Quinn took a picture, just for herself at first. Ruby was lying on the couch, head resting on Milo's back, while Otis lay on the rug beneath them like a silent protector. Sunlight poured in through the blinds, catching the edge of Ruby's eyes, which were open just a crack, serene and watchful. Quinn added a caption before posting it on the Instagram page she had created for Ruby a few days earlier, mostly to document their journey together. The page was called The Seventh Return. The post read, "From growls to pillow buddies, the longest journey is the one to the heart." She thought it might get a few likes. By the next morning, it had over 12,000. People began sharing Ruby's story. Some left comments about their own adopted pets, about second chances, about trauma and trust. Some said it reminded them of someone they loved. Some simply wrote, "Thank you. I needed this." The account kept growing, slowly, then steadily. Each photo captured a moment of quiet victory. Ruby sharing a toy with Otis, Ruby tolerating Milo's endless grooming, Ruby learning yoga beside Quinn, and promptly falling over during downward dog. It wasn't curated, it wasn't posed, it was real. And in that honesty, people saw themselves. To outsiders, Ruby was just another rescue dog who had been successfully rehabilitated. A happy ending, a feel-good story. But to Quinn, she was something else entirely. "She changed me," Quinn said one day, almost absently, while brushing Ruby's fur. "Not just the way I see dogs, but the way I see fear and love and what it takes to heal." Because Ruby hadn't just learned how to coexist. She had learned how to let go, how to soften, how to receive love without questioning its conditions. And in doing so, she had taught Quinn the very lesson she'd spent years studying in textbooks but never fully grasped until now. Sometimes the most wounded hearts hold the deepest capacity for love. It was in the small things. Like how Ruby never left Otis's side during storms now, curling beside him even when thunder cracked the sky. Or how she'd nose Milo's food bowl gently toward him if he hadn't eaten yet. Or how, when Quinn came home after a long day, Ruby would greet her not with wild barking, but with a soft press of her head into her leg, as if to say, "I missed you. I'm glad you're back." This wasn't about training anymore. It was about connection. It was about 3 animals and 1 woman who had somehow stumbled into each other's lives, each carrying their own quiet histories of heartbreak, and decided, together, that it didn't have to define them anymore. One evening, as golden light spilled across the floor, Quinn sat on the couch with her journal in hand, Ruby's head in her lap. She wrote one sentence. "She used to brace for the world like it was coming to hurt her. Now she greets it like a friend she's learning to trust again." She paused, then added, "And I guess, so do I." Because Ruby's healing wasn't a destination. It was a ripple. And the life they now shared, it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs, forever. In a world that often gives up too quickly, Ruby taught us that trust is not broken in a day, and neither is it built in one. As Helen Keller once said, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it. Thank you for watching this story on Vale Marks, a place where stories are more than words. They are reminders of who we can choose to be. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Your support is not just a number, it's what keeps this channel alive, helping me bring more stories that heal, uplift, and inspire. Let's walk this journey together, one story at a time.